I'm going to ask, just because I know we're running a little bit long on time, we have one more speaker, and the last speaker, I'm going to have Tom come up, please. Thank you, Ken. Yep. And Tom, I'm sorry, but I'm going to ask you to go fairly rapidly, but do wait while the translator is translating. Okay. Thank you.
Ready for me to start?
Yes, let me quickly do a quick intro. Sorry, I'm falling back here. Tom is the Patrick J. McGovern Professor of Management at MIT Sloan School and the founding director, as I said before, of the Center for Collective Intelligence. And he teaches organizational design and leadership. And today he's going to be speaking about new ways to harness our collective intelligence to find optimal solutions for today's global challenge and the big one we have in front of you. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, Your Holiness. So I think it's clear from the presentations we've just heard that global climate change is perhaps one of the biggest problems facing we humans today. It's really complicated, really big, and really hard. Now, there is, however, I think, one reason at least for optimism. And that is that we now have a way of approaching big, complicated, hard problems that wasn't even possible 15 years ago. If you think of examples like Wikipedia and Google and the communities that have developed open source software, it's now clear that we can, in those cases, harness the collective intelligence of thousands of people all over the world to work on really big, hard, complicated problems at a scale and with a degree of collaboration that was never possible before. So the question is, could we use this crowdsourcing approach to help figure out what to do about global climate change? Could we, for instance, have thousands of people all over the world help figure out better and in more detail how to do the things Rebecca talked about? Or could they come up with ideas for other things we might try that Rebecca hasn't thought of yet? To try to answer these questions, we've created a central repository on the web called the Climate Collab. It's a place where people can come together from all over the world to create proposals for what we should do about global climate change. These proposals can include any ideas people have about things like political changes or technological changes or economic changes. And in addition to the ideas that these people put into the proposals, they also, we think, is important to have the proposals be grounded in the actual physical and economic reality we face. So each of the proposals at the global level needs to include some quantitative assumptions about what emission reductions would result from the actions being proposed. Then, built into the online platform is a computer simulation model developed by John Sterman and a number of other people that predicts the likely impacts of the changes proposed on things like temperature change, sea level rise, and various kinds of economic costs. We have already over 3,900 people as registered members of this online community, including students, software developers, environmentalists, and people from many other walks of life. Over 44,000 people from almost every country in the world have visited the site. And in addition to all the other people in the global crowd, we also have some of the world's leading climate change researchers involved, not only the ones shown here, but a number of others involved as judges and as advisors to various parts of the project. We believe that this allows the experts to bring the best current knowledge into the discussion on the website, and it also lets them help evaluate the different ideas proposed by different people. Now, for the last 3 years, we've had annual contests where these people compete with proposals for which are the best ideas. For instance, in last year's annual contest, one of the winning proposals was actually a combination of the ideas in the 3 winning proposals from the previous year. Another winning proposal came from a team of people who met each other on the Climate Collab site. That team included an environmental activist from Florida, a sociology professor from Minnesota, and a climate change researcher from Australia. There were also winning proposals from people in India and Nigeria and a number of other places around the world. And all the winners presented their ideas in briefings at the United Nations in New York and in the US Congress in Washington, D.C. Now, that's what we've done so far. What we've just started, only a little over a month ago, is a new phase of the project, where instead of having people try to solve the whole problem all at once, we're breaking the problem down into pieces, where different groups of people can work on different parts of the overall problem. One dimension for breaking down the problem is what actions are being done. That can include various ways of reducing emissions in industry and transportation and so forth. It also includes how we might adapt to whatever changes occur, even if we are unable to reduce emissions enough to stop much temperature change. And it may even include various forms of geoengineering as possibilities. It also includes not just things that governments can do, but things that businesses can do, things that other organizations can do, and things that individual people, consumers and citizens all over the world can do. And of course, it includes things that can be done in different places in the world. For instance, we have or soon hope to have sub-contests on topics like what can electric utilities in the world's leading emitting nations do to reduce emissions from generation of power? What can city governments do to adapt to rising sea levels? What social actions could most effectively change cultural attitudes about climate change? So it's not just physical things we're looking at, but also social things. For instance, here's one example of a contest that already exists, focusing on a problem of how to reduce emissions from the cement industry. It turns out that's one of the industries where there's the most potential for emission reduction. We're doing this contest in collaboration with Richard Branson's funded Carbon War Room. And as with all the other contests, this one includes an advisor, typically an expert, many from faculty places like MIT and Stanford, but also other kinds of experts representing different stakeholders that are involved in a particular issue, or people who could actually implement the ideas that come out of the contest in a different area. Each contest also includes what we call a Climate Collab Fellow, often a graduate student or a postdoc, to help coordinate all the activities. And these things can also, we hope to also have people involved who could actually implement the ideas that come out of the different contests. As I said, some of the contests focus on physical actions, like putting insulation in attics. Others focus on social actions, like passing laws or educational programs. And others, like this one, include both physical and social actions.
And this one is on reducing emissions from the manufacture of cement.
Exactly, exactly. Now, once we have all these sub-problems and contests working on different parts of the problem, then of course the question is, how do we know that all those pieces of things will add up to something that actually helps solve the whole problem? How do we know we're not just solving 10% of the problem as opposed to the whole thing? And so we expect next year to have another series of contests that bring together ideas from lots of different sub-proposals into larger integrative proposals at the national and global levels. Now, are we sure that all this work will lead to better solutions to the global climate change problem? No, we're not sure. But our hope is that the Climate Collab will help bring together scientists, policymakers, business people, and many others from all over the world to plan and also, importantly, to help gain support for better climate actions than anything we might ever otherwise have come up with. And we think that is a hope worth working for. Thank you.
Tom, you're proposing collective action and using technology as a way of harnessing collective action. When you do that, do you let individuals off the hook?
Not at all. Not for a number of reasons. One is, of course, it's individuals who are going to be helping, who are going to be participating in all this. So we see this as a way of helping involve many more individuals in our global conversation about this question than would ever otherwise have been possible. Today, the conversation is mostly a conversation among experts perhaps and political leaders. We see this as a way where lots of people who are intelligent and creative and in many cases deeply passionate about these questions, a way that they can inject their own ideas, their own creativity, their own energy into this conversation and have a chance that if they do have good ideas, those can actually rise to the attention of people who can actually do something about it. So one way individuals are involved is as the participants in this global community. The other way is that some of the contests have to do with things individuals can do without any government or business or other involvement.
I'm going to ask, again, keeping track on time, for His Holiness to maybe give us some final words here, and if possible, then reflect on what you have said about collective action and trying to use, in this sense, technology to bring lots of great ideas from all over the world in order to create some positive change.
Action, collective action. The idea of collective data, you only that's all the experts, specialists.
It's wonderful that you're providing this forum for many individuals to come together and join in a collective action. His Holiness was saying that when we think of action in this kind of context, we by definition actually mean collective action.
Thank you.
But I think the collective you mean the general public. Yes, among the public, including some scientists, they may come because of the new ideas. Very good. But in any way, that way, I think, provides some kind of sense of responsibility or sense of participation. That's, I think, very important. But the actual sort of the idea must come from experts who spend decades on particular field. So their knowledge is much better. Like me, I think 100,000 like me, no idea. So realistic,
practical,
realistic sort of approach or idea solutions must come from those experts. I have more sort of faith, those experts, individuals, or mainly scientists. Yeah. I like that. Okay.
Well, thank you all of you for sticking with us and listening to this conversation. I really want to thank our panelists here, Kerry Emanuel, Rebecca Henderson, Penny Chisholm, and Tom Malone, of course. And I also want to thank the Center for Ethics and MIT for hosting us, the translator who did a valiant job there when needed, and Your Holiness, thank you so much for participating.
I think nowadays, also you see very much related with the government level. Government level. So here, the collective. That just gives bigger number people get this sort of serious sort of concern. Then their voice can affect their leaders. But scientists, very brilliant scientists, but one single person, they may not sort of concern much.
Of course.
That they may concern seriously number. So I think in order to influence or impact the politicians or leaders, I think this is a movement. I think useful.
And
that's my view.
And the notion was to involve and include the political establishment within that conversation as well, as a way of creating action for the ideas that are there. Again, I want to thank all of you for participating today. I really appreciate it. And I must say, having participated in many, many panels about climate change, this one did not leave me entirely depressed. And I feel like our panelists did a great job of giving us some sense of hope. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I also would like to give my thanks for a very interesting talk. His Holiness will leave the stage. I would appreciate if everyone could stay at their seats, and I'll have a couple announcements just after he leaves the stage. Thank you.
Really, the experts' presentation is so wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Shake hand, shake hand. Thank you. Tika, when do you move it? He will be here in the afternoon. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. See you again. You from which country? Sri Lanka. Oh. What it was.
Ticket stubs so you can get back in, and please be in at your seats by 1 o'clock. The session will start just before 1:30. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll be starting our second session, Panel 2. To do that, I'd like to have a brief introduction for Professor Deborah Ancona. She's the Seeley Distinguished Professor of Management at the MIT Sloan School of Management and the Faculty Director of the MIT Leadership Center. Deborah's pioneering research into how successful teams operate has highlighted the critical importance of managing outside the team's boundaries as well as inside it. This research has led directly to the concept of X-teams as a vehicle for driving innovation within large organizations. Her book, X-Teams, How to Build Teams That Lead, Innovate, and Succeed, was recently published by the Harvard Business School Press. So I'd like to invite Professor Ancona to the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second half of the Global Systems 2.0, Peace, Governance, and most importantly, Diminishing Resources. I would like to especially welcome His Holiness the Dalai Lama, as well as our distinguished panelists. In this session, we hope to follow His Holiness's lead in bringing together research and compassion, knowledge of issues, as well as the process of change. Coming to MIT in mid-October is in anticipation of two great holidays, Halloween and Thanksgiving. These two holidays can easily set the stage for this very forum. Halloween, traced back to its Celtic origins, is about warding off harmful spirits and escaping the things we fear. Thanksgiving's roots trace a very different arc. A festival of gratitude, the pilgrims were not only giving thanks for the harvest, but also recognizing that their very survival had depended upon indigenous tribes who helped them during that very difficult first winter. So what do these holidays have to do with this session? Our panel will highlight some of the problems that we face right now. They will be talking about some of the challenges of diminishing resources, including food, water, health, environmental, and human sustainability. These problems are large and scary. The list is long and daunting, with reality much worse than anything our Halloween monster costumes could conjure up. Our panelists bring us scientific evidence of this reality that is coming, or that is perhaps already here. But in the spirit of Thanksgiving, there is also hope. Our panelists will ask us to think differently, will ask us to move beyond individual interest to concern for the other and for the planet. They will ask us to take on a different attitude toward those who suffer and to think about shifting from materialism and consumerism to a more humanitarian approach. They will ask us to work collectively so that this new epoch, the Anthropocene that we spoke about earlier, will not result in us moving so far above the carrying capacity of the planet that we cannot reverse the trend without disastrous consequences. So it is my pleasure to introduce the panelists that will lead us in that direction, starting first with Jonathan Foley. Jonathan, you want to introduce yourself? Jonathan will take us into the realm of global food security and show us how global patterns of land use are already suboptimal and getting worse. Jonathan is the director of the Institute of the Environment at the University of Minnesota, where he is the McKnight Presidential Chair in the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior. His work focuses on global sustainability, and he is a regular advisor to large corporations, NGOs, and governments around the world. He and his colleagues have published numerous articles in scientific and popular journals, including Science, Nature, and the New York Times. If that's not enough, you can get everything you need from his TED Talk. You can learn more about also the awards and honors that he has achieved, but one of the most prominent is from the National Science Foundation. But most importantly for our purposes here, Jonathan really understands the patterns of land use and how we need to change them to better feed the planet in a time when many people don't have enough to eat. Our second speaker, James Orbinski, will take us into the dark side of climate change, including its possible impact on infectious diseases, water security, and human migration. The picture is not a pretty one. He will then move to the hope that we can move away from this scenario by showing greater respect for human life, by treating people with dignity, while at the same time changing the very systems that have failed those who need them most. James is a true Renaissance man. His appointments span medicine and public health at the University of Toronto, and he is a fellow at the Monk School of Global Affairs. He was the president of the International Council of Médecins Sans Frontières, or as we know it, Doctors Without Borders, at the time the organization received the 1999 Nobel Peace Prize. He became an officer of the Order of Canada in 2009 and was recognized by the Governor General as an advocate for those who have been silenced by war, genocide, and mass starvation. His book, An Imperfect Offering, Humanitarian Action for the 21st Century, has gotten multiple awards. It talks about his experiences as a physician working for Médecins Sans Frontières in Rwanda during the genocide. Having listened to him speak last night, his stories are incredibly sad and compelling. He brings us a unique perspective on how to move individually and collectively into a more humanistic era. Our third speaker, Zeynep Ton, highlights the issue that large numbers of people around the world have jobs that fail to provide a living wage, stability, dignity, and meaning. That the problem is not only there now, but is getting worse. Her research shows, however, with the attitude of Thanksgiving and time, that good jobs and profits can coexist, and that we can create more sustainable businesses. Zeynep teaches at the Operations Management Group at MIT Sloan after having spent 7 years at the Harvard Business School. Her research has been published in scholarly and managerial journals, including Organizational Science and the Harvard Business Review. She was named one of the world's 40 best business schools professors under the age of 40 by Poets and Quants. And she brings a perspective of how businesses can act to improve the lives of their employees without having to sacrifice profits. And last, but certainly not least, John Sterman. John's Halloween tale is quite simple. We are growing too fast and consuming too much. In fact, we have already overshot the carrying capacity of the planet. And if we continue on at this rate, the consequences will be disastrous. It is no wonder that students call him Dr. Doom. His tale of hope, however, is one that relies on personal and social policies that decrease consumption, yet actually improve the quality of our lives. John is the J. Forrester Professor in Computer Science and a professor of systems dynamics at the MIT Sloan School. His research includes systems thinking, In fact, if you go by his office, there are all kinds of systems diagrams continuously being created. Organizational learning and environmental sustainability. He's the author of many articles and books, including the award-winning textbook, Business Dynamics. He has pioneered the development of simulations of corporate and economic systems that are used by corporations, universities, and governments. If you've never played the beer game, I suggest you find a way to do so. Sterman has been awarded numerous awards for his academic work in systems dynamics, has also been named one of MIT's outstanding faculty by Business Week, and has been featured in popular media. Having an office next to John's, I can personally state that he is a tireless worker dedicated to figuring out how to avoid the very doom that he is forecasting. And with that as an introduction, I turn the session over to M. Sanjayan, who was introduced in the prior session, and will take over from here.
Thanks, Deborah. Right. So, good afternoon. You can say good afternoon back. Afternoon. All right, great to be here again, and we're going to focus this time on governance, peace, and diminishing resources. And most of us managed to have a great lunch today. Thank you all for coming out here. Thanks to the panelists, and thanks to His Holiness for being here. But we're going to start, like we did before, 10 minutes presentation and then an open discussion with each of our panelists. And we will start with John Foley. And John, we had a great lunch. How can we feed the rest of the world?
Thanks, Sanjan. And thank you, Your Holiness, for the opportunity to be here with you today. Well, how was your lunch? Did you have a good lunch? Good. Want to be polite. Well, we're going to talk about agriculture and the challenges that are facing the global food system today. And as Sanjan was saying, we have basically three challenges facing the world right now revolving around food. The first of which is, can we feed the world today, right now, when we have just over 7 billion people in the world today, about 7.2 billion people living on Earth today, and approximately 1 billion of us, depending which number you talk about, are food insecure. We don't, people who don't know where their next meal is coming from, or are chronically malnourished and maybe even stunted. So 1 in 7 people are stalked by hunger in the world today, and this is already unacceptable. And then we look to the future and think, how will we feed a growing world, a world where the demands on food will be increasing very dramatically over time? And it'll be increasing for two reasons. One, of course, is population, which we talked about this morning. We're now, again, a little over 7 billion people. And if we head into the future, it looks like we'll be adding another 2 billion people, maybe 3 billion people, unless we follow your advice and all become monks and nuns. But even then, there'll be some population growth, because a lot of population growth isn't just because of people having babies, but because some people are living a lot longer than their parents and grandparents, which is very good. So we have some population growth yet to happen. About 2 billion more people are coming to join us for dinner. But we also have about 4 billion people in the world who are now becoming wealthier in China, India, Russia, Brazil, and other countries. And they're looking down the menu, and they're looking at different choices that they ever had before, maybe looking at the Americans and the Europeans and others and saying, I want some of that. And they're eating more calories, more meat, and other things, which are putting more pressure on resources. If you bring that meat consumption and population growth together, it looks like we might have to double the amount of food that the world has on hand by 2050. It took us 10,000 years to get where we are today with agriculture, and we'll have to double it in the next 38 years, which is already by itself a big challenge. So we have to feed everyone. We have to double it in the next generation or two. And what I want to talk about a little bit is why we also have to think about it as a sustainability challenge and make sure we have a viable planet moving into the future. This is, climate change is the issue we talked about this morning, but agriculture is another global environmental issue when you think about how much of the world's land we use to grow food. This map shows the amount of land in the world just used to graze food. In green are the crops, and in brown are the world's pastures where animals are being raised. If you look at those together, it's 40% of the Earth's land surface is already being used to feed us. And most of the land that's left are deserts or ice or tropical rainforest, an area we should not be cutting down in terms of our environmental sustainability. Agriculture also, through things like irrigation and other uses of water, is the biggest consumer of water on Earth too. About 70 to 90% of the water we use in the world is used for one thing, irrigating crops. So that's a huge amount of water use tied into food. And furthermore, agriculture, because it covers so much of the Earth's surface and so many of our watersheds, is the biggest contributor to water pollution, affecting lakes and rivers and even oceans at a global scale. Furthermore, connecting back to climate change, it turns out, and most people are surprised by this, climate change is not just an energy problem. In fact, only half of the emissions going into the atmosphere for climate change stem from the combustion of fossil fuels. The other half include things like agriculture and land use and other gases, including carbon dioxide from deforestation, methane coming from livestock and rice fields, and something called nitrous oxide, or N2O, which comes from soils when we over-fertilize them. If you put them together, that's 35% of our climate-changing gases come from feeding the world, from agriculture and land use. To put that in context, only 15% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from all the world's transportation. So this is actually the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases of any economic sector. If you want to solve climate change, you have to think about food first. So if you want to do all of this, you have to think about feeding the world, doubling it by mid-century, and making it truly sustainable. We have to succeed at all three of these things. If any one of them goes wrong, we're in big trouble. So we have to solve all of these problems at exactly the same time, which makes this a truly wicked problem in many, and not just for the Boston people saying wicked, but a truly tenacious problem, very hard to solve. So we look at this, and my lab and many other people around the world have been thinking about how can we do it? How can we feed more people and simultaneously cut back on the environmental harms of agriculture? We can't do just one, we have to do both. So we've come up with about 5 kind of major strategies, and I'll present those quickly. Love to hear your thoughts about this, about how we can solve the environmental and food security problems simultaneously. One was to first stop and basically cease deforestation. We deforest much of the world, like this part of the Amazon that you see in this picture, basically for food. But the food that we grow here are things like cattle and soybeans in Brazil, or oil palm and timber in Indonesia. These aren't feeding the world's poor, they're feeding the world's middle class. This isn't the base of food security, it's really for indulgent crops, things we don't really need, like meat and oil palm. So this is not really a good bargain. We're causing a lot of environmental harm, but we're not really feeding the billion people who are hungry as a result of this. So we need to put that aside and stop doing that. What we need to do instead is figure out how to grow more food on the land we already have, rather than clearing into the rainforest. And there are many opportunities to do this. I apologize for the data slide here, but this map shows where there are opportunities in the world to grow more food on land we already use for agriculture. This is in the case of maize, or corn. And we find many places in the world, across Africa here, in West Africa, South Central Africa, even in Latin America, and also even in Europe. If you look at Eastern Europe there are many places where soils are very good, the climate is fine, but we're not achieving good crop production, mainly because of governance, institutions, lack of investment, things that we need to solve. But the world can grow more food there. We just have to equip it to grow that kind of food in new ways. So there are opportunities to feed more people, but mainly at what we might think of as the base of the pyramid, not in the United States and Europe or clearing rainforests, but in lands we've already cleared where the crop production isn't so good today. Many opportunities for this that would help lift people out of poverty and increase food security. We also have to think of ways to be much more efficient. I mentioned how much land and water we use to grow food. There are many places where it takes about, in terms of water,